Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this 17th Roundtable discussion between myself, Doug McKenty, Dr. Kevin McCairn, Mark Kulacz, and special guest host John Knox. Today's episode was recorded on September 15th, 2020, and focuses on the challenges of internet research amidst the prevalence of misinformation and non-expert opinion. This conversation is designed to help all those seeking research methodologies that will improve their abilities to extract truth from the vast sea of information available to each individual in the age of the internet. Kevin McCairn received a PhD in neuroscience from the Open University in Great Britain before engaging in postdoctorate research in Japan, first at the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, then with Kyoto University. He went on to become a principal investigator at the Korea Brain Research Institute. His work has focused on deep brain simulation and basal ganglia physiology with a focus on treating Parkinson's disease and Tourette syndrome. With the advent of the COVID-19 outbreak, Dr. McCairn chose to become an outspoken critic of some of the wilder theories expressed on the internet. He has since dedicated time to his YouTube channel, Dr. Kevin McCairn, PhD, to refute these claims based on the current scientific literature. Mark Kulacz is the founder and managing director of Housatonic IT Services. After earning a bachelor's degree in computer science and engineering at the University of Connecticut, Mark spent decades in software engineering and internet-related technologies before starting his own company focusing on IT services for nonprofits and citizen journalists. Mark has his own YouTube channel, Housatonic, producing commentary about the news of the day within the context of his background in tech services. Our third guest on the program today is myself, Doug McKenty. I have a background in history and philosophy studies at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, and have produced a local radio interview program entitled The Thursday Morning Report on KZYX Radio in Mendocino County, California, as well as my current show, The Shift with Doug McKenty, which can be found on YouTube and Facebook. I also host and produce content for Transparent Media Truth. All my work can be found at www.theshiftnow.com. Stay tuned for this informative episode with special guest host John Knox. John has been a longtime political activist who focuses his work on the Great Chemtrail debate. He is the lead organizer of Los Angeles Skywatch, perhaps the largest anti-geoengineering coalition in California. This program is for all those engaged in pursuing critical thinking through internet research. We have put together a group including experts from both the sciences and the liberal arts to discuss how to avoid the pitfalls of an information glut and learn to cultivate a personal worldview based on facts derived from primary source material rather than just falling for the latest internet fad. As always, I'd like to thank producer Rob Rubin for working behind the scenes to put this all together. You can find this and all other episodes of the Roundtable discussions on YouTube at Transparent Media Truth and on the web at www.transparentmediatruth.com. He is on Twitter at TransparentMed1. If you like what you're hearing, please consider leaving a donation at the Transparent Media Truth Patreon page. We appreciate your support. Enjoy this conversation between guest host John Knox, myself, Doug McKenty, Mark Kulacz of Housatonic, and Dr. Kevin McCairn, PhD.
Hey, I'm John Knox, and this is another roundtable for Transparent Media Truth, courtesy of the executive producer, Rob Rubin. And today, we're with Kevin McCairn, PhD, and Mark Kulacz of Housatonic, and also with Doug McKenty. Doug is going to be in on the conversation today, and I'll give you their information very quickly. Kevin McCairn can be found on YouTube under Kevin W. McCairn, PhD, and he's on Discord. Mark can be found on YouTube with Housatonic Live, and of course, Doug can be found on The Shift with Doug McKenty. Now, I'm John Knox. I can be found on YouTube with John Knox Activist. It's been a while since I put some videos up, but I intend to get back into it very soon. Guys, I'm so glad you're here today. So what we want to do is let's have each one of you guys introduce yourself briefly and just give a quick overview. And I've got my first question. I know where I want to go. And Kevin, first with you. Just give us a little bit of quick background about yourself.
Well, thank you for allowing me to come and talk today. My background is systems neuroscience. I'm a 20-year research veteran. I'm, ill health retired now, but I've been going public with respect to the internet dynamics around SARS-CoV-2 since, end of February, March, and that's entailed coming across various dialogues and approaches to people getting information out that I've tried to sort of stem the tide of the flight of ideas which many people have started to run with.
Okay. All right. Mark, what about you?
Thanks for having me on, John. My background is, my name is Mark Kulacz. I currently represent my own little nonprofit startup called Housatonic Information Technology Services. My background is 20 years as a software engineer, operating systems, drivers, competitive analysis, competitive analyst, product marketing, etc. And my advocacy in improved treatment and awareness of chronic Lyme disease, opioid addiction, and being shocked with all of the chaos after the 2016 election. One thing led to the next. Now I have a YouTube show, and I do my own citizen research. They're careful not to say journalism, but a citizen researcher. And I try to use my skill set to support other people who are trying to do the same, both as far as research techniques and information management needs.
Okay. And the one thing I wanted to cover for the viewing audience is today, all of us had a challenge to get onto Zoom for whatever reasons. And right now, Mark's video feed is spotty at best. But we got good, strong audio. So we will work with that. And Doug, what about you, my friend?
Hey, John, and thanks for driving the bus on this one. It's kind of fun to be on the other side of the camera, as it were. But yeah, I mean, I have a background in history and philosophy. I studied that in school, and I have basically spent probably the last 15 years as a kind of a citizen journalist, applying that to, I started at the local radio station here in Mendocino County with an open lines talk show, and then with a long form interview show, and then moved that onto the web with The Shift with Doug McKenty, where I do longer interviews with individuals who are writing books. You know, I typically will find a book that I like or a topic that I'm into and find an expert that I can have a discussion with. And so I continue to learn a lot, and I enjoy getting information out there, especially alternative information, because I've just discovered over the years that the corporate media is basically failing humanity. I think most of us here can see that the narratives that they spin don't really follow with the facts that you can find if you know how to do good research and you find primary source material. So I like to talk to people that are intelligent and have something different to say than what you're getting from the corporate and the government narrative that just splashes all over the TV screen. So
absolutely,
been a fun ride.
You actually hit something that I've been thinking about for a while. Is when you deal with the media, which you and I have actually made livings in at different times. You're dealing with a corporate frame of mind, which is driven by the dollars and cents. And, you know, the challenge for people today with information is to find an independent yet zealous researcher. And I think, you know, with Mark and with Kevin, we've got exactly that. You know, as long as someone is independent of government, universities, and corporations, then they have in my mind, they have a shot at me listening to them. And I've always told people, find the zealous independent researcher and pay attention to him. So the quick line on me, very quickly, John Knox, and I made a living in film and television for a while as an actor. I've also been a producer, director, and all other things on small independent pieces. I'm also a woodworker, and that's where I base my common sense in. You know, that I look at projects, design them, build them, figure out problems as I go, and then it must be finished and be functional. And if it's beautiful on top of that, that's great, but it's got to be functional. So that's where my desire for common sense comes from. So one of the things that I want to cover very quickly, given my lack of expertise, but given Kevin and Mark's sea of expertise, is where do you draw the line between expertise, embellishment, and then conspiracy theory? And I would like Kevin to take that to start off with.
Well, first of all, let's just preface this by saying you don't need a string of letters after your name to be an expert. Let's just clear that one off the table. But it does help, particularly when you're dealing with issues around technical aspects where the 99.9% of the population are not going to be exposed. And you made mention of woodwork. Scientific techniques you can think of as woodwork. It involves often, particularly in biology labs, using your hands, running experiments, and you want to get it functional. And if the data you get out is beautiful, then great, and you can use that for scientific publication. And for all its faults, the review process in going towards magazines or periodicals, I should say, does help filter information. And especially in the internet age, right now, anyone with a search engine can, they start passing through information and I would say not realizing that they're just getting the search engine results rather than actual research or hands-on research. And again, you need something approximating a established research career with a particular technique. And most experts have a particular discipline that they prefer or that they've made a name in. And so there, I would say that's your expert. And as you transition along the spectrum towards what I would consider conspiracy theorem, flight of ideas, it just comes to when you can't substantiate the information that you're putting forward beyond the person's own. Well, I think this is right, and being reliant on other people's confirmation biases to support that information. And in the current times that we're in, we're seeing that writ large, and that can revolve around any issue, whether it's the most simplest of ones, which is the existence of viruses, to people's view of medicine in general, or another hot topic issue for the US is vaccines. There's good information and there's bad information in all domains, and you need some way of filtering it beyond just accepting what a title of a article or manuscript will say and cobbling it together to make what you think is a coherent narrative. What you think is coherent might not be.
I agree with that, because what I've said to people from the very beginning, I learned this one Latin term, cui bono. Hopefully I say it fairly decently, but who benefits from the information when it's distributed if I believe it? Who benefits if this information is taken by me, taken as true, and also repeated and sent on by me? You've always, in my world, you've got to find who paid for this information to be generated. And I think once people always go for that piece of information, then you can start to take seriously or not what's being told to you. If you go to the National Dairy Council and you say, well, I don't know, I've got some questions about milk. I'm not really sure about it. I've got some bad information here. Can you help me? The National Dairy Council is paid to steer you in a certain direction. Well, there are all kinds of organizations around this world that are paid to steer you in the direction that the people who provide the cash want you to go in. And I think that's why I love to talk to independent experts like yourself and like Mark. Doug, I'm not so sure if he's independent or not, but So,
Right.
Mark, what about yourself? How do you see this conversation?
Well, I mean, just that the example you just gave there, John, about what about milk? Is it good? What are the health benefits, the risks, etc.? Just the fact that you asked the question and then went out seeking information. Yes, much of what you're going to find is going to be biased to steer you, but you asked the question. And the reason why I bring this up is because as I've done more research and gotten a little bit more visibility, a lot of data will come to me. It'll be presented to me from people with an inside source or, hey, I found you on the internet. I wanted to share this story with you. Everything that comes to me without me even asking for it, I've noticed is some of the least reliable data that I get. It only is sent to me for a reason. It's someone. I mean, there are a few people who are legitimately maybe they've had a relative struggling with a drug addiction. There are cases such as that, but more often than not, that information comes with a bias. It comes to me because it wants to influence something I'm thinking. Happens all the time. So I tend to trust things which answers to questions that I'm asking and I seek the answer for, as opposed to things that are just sent to me without even me going out soliciting for it, unsolicited information. Where this conversation goes, we've all seen the yard signs of a whole list of values, the black background, and there's several different phrases on these signs. A lot of them up here in New England anyways. One of the phrases on those signs that you'll see a lot of is, science is real. Okay? I have a degree I'm very lucky. I went to University of Connecticut. I have a degree in computer engineering, not computer science. And what I've seen is that there's less and less capability of people to be multidisciplined and to know how to problem solve, as opposed to people, accepting what to think and then turning around and then defending that and then promoting it. And yes, science is real, but also we are meant to always, question things and try to dig deeper and go to that next level. I think, spiritually, that's what we're always meant to do. And in this world of, now in the new world of analysts, people who are trying to do research, is that many of them need to learn, first of all, how to learn, and then how to, it's not about defending your views. It's about the one person that I always want to prove wrong is me. If I can't prove myself wrong, well, then I must be onto something, right? And it's really hard to learn how to be comfortable with doing research, having a wrong conclusion, and then updating that, your hypothesis, and then moving on. We have a big shortage of that right now. Instead, many people, mainstream media and independent researchers with viewpoints, with hypotheses, and they just cannot modify them. Some of them are, they just, there's a lot of it takes skill. It takes skill. It takes practice. And I'm just not sure everyone is quite cut out for that. And certainly the education program right now is not helping people. They come right out of college incapable of knowing how to do critical analysis, thinking the real scientific process of putting out hypotheses, testing the hypotheses, going to then theories, right? That's real science. Right now, we are lacking science. And the catchphrase is that if you question that, you don't believe in science.
Yes. And, from a layman's point of view, having been through the 1950s, the 1960s, and having seen tobacco commercials, and then later on information about sugar, the science that these industries bought, and asbestos, basically, tried to prove their side of the business. And it was called science, and no doubt it was some kind of version of science, and no doubt it was practiced by somebody who even had some kind of degree in science, but it was still bought information that, wasn't right. It was damaging to people. And I think that's why all of us have always got to have a healthy skepticism when somebody trots out that word. Oh, it's science, and you better bow down to it. Well, who paid for this science? Tell me about that. Oh, well, look, the Goodyear blimp. Let's talk about something else. Doug, what about yourself? And how do you see this?
Well, just to start off, in the interest of transparency, I would like to say that I have not made a living doing this kind of work. It's always just been a passion of mine. I volunteered at the local radio station, but I do have a bit of an academic background in history and philosophy, so that's where I come to it. And that's where I learned how to do my research, especially in the study of history, just really figuring out what's the difference between a primary and a secondary and a tertiary source, figuring out what, the more solid sources are, and coming up with a valid argument and being able to make an argument based on the evidence that's at hand. And so I don't really see the process. It's kind of funny because there's a lot of crossover in this way between the liberal arts and then the world of science, because we're all using reason and logic and learning how to construct an argument that makes sense with the facts that we have at hand. And then the more that I've gotten into all of this is just, I had an interesting process. I think I grew up like most of us, where I'm watching the news. I'm thinking the news is important. We're taught that the news is something that every good citizen watches, and we inform ourselves, and then we can make a vote based on our opinions about what we see on the news. And just because of my history background, I started to kind of analyze the journalism that was being done, and just realizing how many times that the narratives that were being presented by the corporate media, really either they didn't include all the facts, or their sources were really sketchy. A lot of times I'll see entire memes presented across the media spectrum where the only source is, an anonymous source from the CIA. And it's just like, why does, and everyone will believe it. Hey, all of my favorite news sources are talking about this. It must be true. But then you go back and you look at the primary source, and it'll be one article from the Washington Post that was just disseminated by 200 different journalists and sourced, and you go back to the original source article, and it's an anonymous source that the whole narrative is based on. Or, just a few facts are relayed, and you go do some research and you find out that there's other facts that were omitted from the article that creates a totally different narrative if you really look at it. So especially when I started getting introduced to the alternative media on the internet, and then this term conspiracy theory came up, and it was like, well, who are being the better journalists? Who are the ones that are sticking to their guns, who have the best primary source material, and who are creating the most accurate narratives based on the facts at hand. And just consistently over and over again, it was the independent journalists, the ones that are often called conspiracy theorists by the corporate or government media, who just did better work. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like we're all just kind of doing a job here. We're trying to figure out at least the closest approximation to the truth, to what's really going on in the world, based on the media that's at hand. And a lot of the independent researchers are just doing better work than the corporate media guys. And over time, I've actually started to see that there seems to be a larger agenda at work where the entire corporate media will push a narrative, everybody will believe it, and then a handful of people like myself that are independent will say, hey, this narrative doesn't make any sense. I mean, I think we could talk about COVID, we could talk about Russiagate, we could talk about a lot of these big events that everybody thinks are true, but when you go back and you look at the primary source material, you find out this is really sketchy. I mean, the whole COVID thing started off with the entire mainstream media comparing the case fatality rate of COVID to the infection fatality rate of the flu, and then saying, see how much more deadly COVID is. And it's like, come on, guys. I mean, you're comparing apples to oranges. This makes no sense. And yet everybody, was scared of the bejesus, and now we've been in lockdown for 6 months. And it's like you try to explain to people, they can't believe that these journalists couldn't tell the difference between a case fatality rate and an infection fatality rate, but apparently they didn't, and they pushed this narrative over and over and over again until everybody believed it. And now you try to tell people, and they don't believe me. So what's going on there? I mean, but anyway,
Yeah.
I'll let you guys take the mantle, but that's kind of my angle here.
You brought up an interesting case because there seemed to be a switch in the narrative from fatalities to the amount of cases that have been found. Of course, they're testing a lot more, so they're going to find a lot more cases, assuming the test is even reliable. And yet, that's not something I can speak to. But Kevin, you can speak to these tests. Do you feel about the RT-PCR test that what Kary Mullis is supposed to have said about the test that he invented before he died, after he got his Nobel Prize, that he had said, please don't use this test to look for an infectious disease. What do you feel about that sentence, and how do you respond to it?
Well, one, I would encourage people to actually go and look how that statement's been sort of skewed to fit various narratives. But
Okay.
I would just go with the simple nuts and bolts issue of these are all tools, okay, and under a particular circumstance, a particular tool is necessary. Now, I'll state from the outset, I don't agree with what looks like drive-through testing and mass testing. That's not how this is supposed to be done. I'm not a clinician, I'm a scientist, and I'm confident that RT-PCR or PCR in general has a high reproducibility, and used under the right circumstances can give you a pretty concrete result with respect to what you're looking for, which is the probes that you put in to determine whether you're looking for Epstein-Barr virus or SARS-CoV-2. And the issue is that, again, I don't know, what I see tend to be, a lot of it seems to be uniquely American problems for some reason. And you've alluded to the fact that there's a corporate model which I think has distorted a lot of not only the narrative but people's minds, and as such, where they've commoditized the information rather than it being as there for a public good or a public service, it's become corrupted. So, in terms of the RT-PCR, I think if you're feeling ill and you go to the doctor and you say, okay, and the doctor suspects a particular condition, there are a number of tests the doctor can do, and or PCR and its derivatives can be used in those circumstances. And like any scientific investigation, we use a whole bunch of tools to get to try to get to sort of a base reality with what's going on. And in physiology and medicine, it's one of the more difficult areas because the systems are so complex. but again, I see a lot of hysteria being pumped through, like I say, my email inbox and my YouTube comment section, because people have glommed on to what they think is some valid criticism, where they haven't gone and looked, as Mark said, where they've been told a bit of information, but have they really gone back and passed it, through the proper filters and done the research? And I would just add this: the most scientific endeavor that has a pedigree that goes back hundreds, even more years, depending on which particular discipline you want to look at. And how many people have spent the time to fully understand that, have their opinion about it, tried, in the forge of public opinion, and then come back and made any necessary adjustments. And if you're anything approximating a competent scientist, you must have gone through that process a few times, right? To even begin to sort of climb above the masses who are sort of, everyone's looking for an explanation of reality. What's the important thing is um, what's the validity of your information with which you're doing it. And then, then you get into the whole issue of psyops, etc., and how information has been weaponized for one particular idea or ideology or another.
And I think, since you brought that up, Kevin, I think that is the one subject that we're dealing with, all of us, in this realm right now. Because we are experiencing this media octopus, basically trying to drive perceptions all into one area. And it's always been like that since before our grandparents knew each other. But now, with the technology that they have today, it's being ramped up. I wanted to ask you really quickly, since we were on the COVID subject, do you feel that the virus has prints from more than one country, like U.S., Canada, China? How do you feel about that?
It's difficult to say with respect to the virus itself. We can look at how countries have supported the infrastructure, the scientific infrastructure, to allow this type of research to have taken place. And there are many countries which you can point to as having a hand in this. The issue that we're dealing with is that you essentially have a detonation. So you've got right now, as I've argued for, that this agent has been a gain of function agent. Okay, you very rarely see that being discussed. It doesn't matter across the media which side you think is the right one. It for sure now, in my mind, the evidence is there that says yes, there has been deliberate changes made to the genome of this virus, and what that means with respect to how it impacts people's health. Well, I think we're finding that out right now, and the the problem is that at this point in history, the United States, its population, its infrastructure is uniquely positioned in a very vulnerable state because of, I don't know, last 75 years after the Second World War and last 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that life probably became a little bit too comfortable. The corporations got a bit too greedy, and you've got a mass population with serious comorbidities, and this allows the agent to take advantage of a lot of people. And I'm concerned about many factors around this, and that includes the virus isn't real, and those saying, well, look, it's people with comorbidities. Well, you know what? A lot of people have comorbidities, and those people with comorbidities still have people that are either dependent on them, are loved ones, and we're just going to throw them to the wolves because we've got a particular ideological stance that we want to adhere to. It's this type of thinking that I find probably, I'm not going to say as concerning as a gain of function agent being released, but and particularly in the US circumstances where the responses from an outside observer has been one of just chaos. And
Do you think the
I could go on and
chaos
on.
has been engineered, or do you think it's organic?
I do think it comes from the contradictions within the US as a social construct. So much like the Soviet Union collapsed under its own contradictions, I think you're just seeing the US being subject to the same types of environmental pressures, and in something like a public health scenario where one, you don't have a basic, health service that's free at point of service, that you've allowed people to get unhealthy, and you've got a profit incentivized health service. Whereas if a health service is considered a more fundamental feature of the fabric of your society, and there isn't that goal to maximize it for profit, which is another US problem. Okay, it's other countries don't have that problem. But what I would add is that even countries that have non-profit driven health systems, they have had problems. Now, different countries differ by geography and the population, etc. But like I say, the West has been, say, a perfect storm brewing, and that's come from many different sources, not just a lot of people's personal choice involved, not just sketchy news sources, whichever one is your one that you want to blame, etc. Fox News being the classic. So
Yes, it's the classic. Well, Doug, since you do have a background in news, how do you feel about that?
Well, from what Dr. McCairn is saying there, one of the things that came to my mind was that what seems to be happening, from my point of view, in the United States, is that everything is becoming hyper politicized. I mean, every single healthcare choice. Another interesting thing that came to mind too, just hearing what he was saying, is that whether or not, and we do pay for our own healthcare here, but when the government pays for healthcare, they're buying it from the same corporations that we are. So, I mean, we're all kind of in bed with the same corporate healthcare system. And where I come from, the angle that I've been coming from all this, from all the people that I've talked to and the different perspectives, is like, I just don't understand why anybody cares if I want to take hydroxychloroquine and zinc for my COVID. Why do we have to have a national debate about it? Why do some people want to make it illegal and some people want to force? It's like everybody wants to come to some kind of conclusion about a personal healthcare choice, and then we're supposed to have some great national debate, and then whatever the government says, we're all supposed to do that. And it's like, we can actually live in a world where we just make different choices, and some of us make better choices than others. And sometimes there's just more than one way to skin a cat, and different choices work fine for different people. So this whole thing that's been going on, where every single issue that comes up becomes this hyper political issue, and oh, this is Trump's fault, or oh, this is the Democrats' fault, or oh, everybody's got to take sides and root for their team. And so much of this is like, why don't you just make your own personal choice and stay out of everybody else's business? I mean, that's where I'm coming to with it. And I think things would have worked out just fine if we'd had a situation where there was healthcare freedom. People could have chose personally, whether they wanted to stay home or whether they wanted to keep working or whether they wanted to wear a mask or not wear a mask, or, if they wanted to take hydroxychloroquine and zinc or use ivermectin or wait to go to the hospital and get remdesivir. We would have figured it out. And I don't think the whole situation, I actually think the situation, we'd all be a lot better off. I mean, these lockdowns and this whole thing that's going on, I mean, I actually believe there must be some other kind of agenda at work here, because the corporate narrative doesn't make any sense to me. And I think the world would work just fine if we had, a lot more freedom of choice and started getting out of everybody else's business. So that's my perspective.
Yeah. Mark, before I want to get your particular slant on this, but I also want to get to a little bit of chronic Lyme disease and also the opioids problem, because I know that's your wheelhouse. And, I'd like to hear a little bit about that. But first, what do you feel about what we've just said?
Well, first off, I just have to follow up what Doug said about the hyper politicization of everything, and masks. If you don't know that there's sometimes a mask is a handy thing in life, you just haven't lived on Earth. If you see dust, you put on a mask. There's times when you're a carpenter, right? Sometimes you wear a mask in the shop, sometimes you don't. And there's certain conditions, whether it's paint. If you're going for a walk in the woods and there isn't anyone within 10 miles, you don't have to wear a mask to protect yourself from a virus. It's a tool. And it's as if the government said everyone needs to walk around carrying a set of vice grips. And then suddenly everyone's arguing like, no, never use vice grips. Or you should use vice grips for everything. Brushing your teeth, eating cereal, always vice grips. It's stupid. It's a tool. And can't we just have a discussion about when to use it, when not to use it? And no one wants to get sick. No one wants their family to get sick. And for the most part, most people don't want to see other people get sick. So why is this a political argument? It shouldn't be. So the Lyme is one of those three issues. And I have this working hypothesis that in order to rattle people enough to realize that they need to get more active in seeking their own information and that the world isn't quite what has been presented to you, is you need like 2 or 3 shocking things. For mine, it was a family member who was dealing with a drug overdose, opioid addiction, and I myself had that for a while, and I've lost a cousin from it, and my wife has had chronic Lyme for many years, and seeing her challenges in having that diagnosed, and then learning about all of the potential long-term side effects or health effects, impacts that come with that, and seeing that it was simply not being discussed in the media. And even mentioning it was considered to be conspiracy theory.
Yes.
We had one doctor's appointment where fortunately I was there, and it was, she was asking for more, for a new, I want to say a prescription for antibiotics to continue them for another month. This is before we started working with a Lyme literate doctor. They actually had someone from the CDC come and talk to my wife and say that she was probably nuts for having the symptoms that go along with that. And it's just one of those things. It shakes you, right? And then I was involved in a whistleblowing incident regarding emails, but we're not going to get into that today. It's the Lyme thing. Now, first, there's several things. I wrote down some notes here. We talked earlier, or you asked Kevin earlier about the statistics, about tracking when it comes to COVID, the death statistics, comorbidities, etc. That leads into a really important topic of when it comes to analyzing the overall impact of COVID-19, the COVID pandemic, SARS-CoV-2, whatever, only looking at fatalities and not looking at potential long-term health impacts. Now, Dr. McCairn has spoken pretty extensively about potential long-term health impacts of people who've had SARS-CoV-2, contracted that virus, or contracted some strains of that virus. Now, only time will tell if Dr. Kevin McCairn is right on that. However, I think that he needs to be listened to, because I know that that's the same problem we have with chronic Lyme. Very few people die from Lyme disease. It happens occasionally. It's marked down as the leading cause of death for a person. But there's evidence that everything from Alzheimer's to multiple sclerosis to other neurological conditions, in addition to chronic fatigue syndrome, are in many cases, not all, but in many cases potentially being encouraged by having Lyme disease, or contracted the Borrelia bacteria from ticks. And that itself is a weaponized version of Borrelia, which was funded by the United States government going back to the 1930s, 1940s. Whether or not that it got out because of an accident or intentional release, I don't know. I don't really care. But what we've learned is that this it can cause many long-term issues, all of which have been increasing as more people have had Lyme disease. The government doesn't want to admit that chronic Lyme is a real thing. They advocate the position that if people take 2 weeks of antibiotics, they should be good. And anything after that, residual, or it's simply a psychological problem. Meanwhile, if what the evidence shows is that you need a much stronger, much more long-term regimen of antibiotics to beat this, along with a better diet, sunlight. There's a whole lot of other things that go along with this suite of being able to fix this. But it won't happen unless we can at least recognize that this illness does exist, and it's not covered in the media. And again, no one dies specifically from Lyme disease. And seeing how it's not spoken about woke me up to how the media manipulates people, oftentimes lying by omission. It's all the things they don't say. You go to Wikipedia, it's the things that aren't in the articles. It's the historical figures that don't have a Wikipedia page. More often than not are some of the most important people. And then you go to Shania Twain, and it's like 50 freaking pages long. It's like, are you kidding me? Meanwhile, the person who weaponized anthrax from Kansas and was the first doctor who oversaw the Plum Island Animal Infectious Disease Research Facility, Wikipedia page. I mean, come on. Anyways, so when the pandemic first started, as awful as it was, and potentially serious, and we still don't really understand all of the potential impacts of it, I said, okay, every bad situation presents an opportunity to do something good. Maybe this is an opportunity to start creating some more awareness of chronic Lyme disease. And we no sooner, I felt as though I started to make some progress, then after a couple of weeks, a whole lot of new positions started to be presented, some of them of which Dr. Kevin McCairn presented, and this opportunity was lost, which has really been frustrating me, because I think we can use one terrible situation to potentially help hundreds of thousands of people who are dealing with another situation, and that's not a political one. I don't care if you're conservative or liberal or whatever, Green Party. I think a lot of people can get help, and it doesn't have to be too expensive. You just recognize that the illness exists, but we're still fighting that battle. Anyways, I just said a lot of information. I'm not sure I answered your question exactly, but hopefully I added something to that conversation.
Well, you did. The thing that I've been picking up from the three of us is there seems to be a power structure or an overall threat that drives so many of these Trojan horse events that are coming towards us. And I want to ask each one of you individually, what do you think is one of the greatest threats to humanity today that we're facing? Kevin, you want to take that to begin with?
That's a long list.
Well, we've only got about 15 or 20 minutes left on the. So just be brief. You can do it.
There would be Well, I would just constrain it by what's the current threats under the current uh, situations, and that just revolves around the things that we've touched base on already, which is this weaponization of narratives, and in doing so, the subtleties and complexities get lost. And Mark makes a good point, because you can look at something like Lyme disease, which has been sort of floating around the scientific, medical, um, alternative spheres. As I can remember the stories sort of coming out in the 90s about was it from wasting disease from deer, etc., and all these types of different hypotheses. But in the rush to for people to establish a name, or establish an approach to, like I said, not just Lyme disease, but currently what we're dealing with respect to SARS-CoV-2, a lot of the subtlety gets lost in the free-for-all of what is politicization. And like I say, I would just give the example of what caused me to come out publicly right at the beginning, which was the debacle of the Surgeon General, the NIAID, and a bunch of other CDC coming out and standing in front of the public when we knew that there was this tsunami coming out from Asia, and saying to people, you don't need masks, right? And the mask was the one thing that people had at that time where it could have potentially limited their load, but because it got politicized so quickly, from people who think that viruses aren't real to those that would argue the left, Democrat, Republican type arguments sort of always sway from the extreme to the bizarre to me. But the fact that that one simple thing couldn't even be agreed upon, when you've got the examples of Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, where it's not even no one has to stand up and say, "Oh, there's a pathogen going around. You might want to wear a mask." It's just part of the culture here. And I would say, look at the numbers of infections and um, deaths that they've had, and no one shut down here because they took that one simple measure without having to even be told to do it. And to see the, I come from the Anglosphere, and to see common sense lost, and there's a lot of reasons why that could be, but um, I place a lot of the blame at sort of critical theory that sort of hijacked the universities, the education systems, and a lot of these alternative media streams to disconnect people from reality in such a way that they become ideologically possessed for their own particular team. And so, yeah, so ideological possession right now is probably the biggest danger that we're dealing with right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. Doug, what do you think?
Well, it's an interesting question, actually, and I kind of when you put it out there, I was like, God, I don't, I haven't even really tried to nail it down to one thing. I think for a while, but I think I would call it imperialism, and this is, I don't know, what it is. People maybe call it the deep state, or whatever the force is that's behind this massive corporate takeover of the planet's resources, the Wall Street versus the Main Street, and what is preventing those of us from just being able to live our lives and live in our communities and make choices for ourselves and do what we like. And then these major corporations that are trying to centralize everything. And, along with that comes all of these resource wars and the military industrial complex and just the whole thing. And I think also, we touched a little bit on the idea of the psyops. Where do these psyops come from? They're coming from something that, I'll call it the empire, or the weaponization of information that Dr. McCairn was just talking about. So true. I think even the hyper-politicization of everything might be part of the program, just to keep people divided and conquered and weakened, so that we can't fight. We can't fight the empire, right? We can't stand up against some of this stuff. So I think if I was to point to one thing, I would just call it imperialism. Call it for what it is. See what we can do to try to stand up against that. I try to decentralize power in my political activism and in my journalism work. I just, I think these conversations could be had on a local level. And I also, have this idea of panarchy, where I think that instead of arguing with each other, a lot of people could just join, start your own sort of big company that provides healthcare and education that, and everybody can join in and give 10% of their income or whatever. Why do we have to force everybody to do everything that one group wants? This constant struggle is getting us nowhere while the empire marches on. So good question. Yeah.
In a way, you kind of reminded me of David Icke's The Postage Stamp Consensus. It seems that we're inundated with that more and more and more as time goes on. Mark, what do you think?
It's sort of, first of all, it's a great question. And I think my response is somewhat in line with Doug's. The way I typically describe it is there is a spreading demand for people to ideologically submit to others people. Mm-hmm. And that I guess that also builds upon what Dr. Kevin McCairn just said in his response. So there is a lot of pressure. Everyone needs to be politicized. Everything's left or right, however you want to describe it. What camp are you in? Which science do you submit to? Mm-hmm. And there is a lot of pressure. Everyone's under pressure right now to adopt one ideology or another. I don't even know how to divide them up anymore, as opposed to, I think what a creator would have hoped from us was for all of us to stand up together and to help each other be the best individuals we possibly can be. Instead, the war is about trying to create a tiered structure of submission.
Yes.
I don't want anyone to submitting to me, and I don't. Please don't. We're all spinning around in the universe together here, and that's the creeping force right now. That's the cancer in our world, and it's very creepy. I don't know how it stops. I don't know how to turn those tides, but that's what spooks me. That's what I see as the big problem.
I think to pick up what you said earlier, you asked the question. You're actually bringing up the subject of, is there a power structure that has basically desired to unite humanity under a controlling umbrella? That's been a question that generations have asked. And of course, the CIA came up with a conspiracy theory term, in the late 70s, I believe it was, it was the late 60s, to denigrate anybody that was going to question the Warren Report. And here we are now into the Warren Report 24/7, 365, except it's on every subject that you could possibly think about that's coming our way. My way of simply stating it is that we are in a war right now. And it is being brought to our literal bodies and our front doors by the power structure. It's coming in terms of GMOs. It's coming in terms of vaccinations. It's coming in terms of fluoridation in the water, EMFs in the atmosphere. You name it. What's the word? Hormone disruptors. Everything that's coming towards us that's been told this is good for you really has a back door to it, which is actually harmful. And I think anybody who asks these questions should keep on asking those questions, and they don't have to make a pain in the ass out of themselves, although some of us do. But to deny that, any group would desire to have control and dominance over our lives, given the evidence that we've all seen, that would be, I believe, the height of foolishness. Cheryl, we're up on 54 minutes, and what I'd like to do is, given where, our conversation has gone, do any of you feel that there's a gap, that what you might have wished to be covered? And I think this would be a perfect time to bring it up. And once again, Dr. McCairn, I will bring it back to you. Do you feel that, we should cover anything today that you wish we had, but we haven't?
Well, I would have liked to have focused a little bit more on the SARS-CoV-2 issue, because there is and I'll just use your words, John, that there is elements of a war going on, and you're looking at something right now where you're literally seeing a dual-use technology rampage across the world, and you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. One, why are you not seeing it discussed in terms of the molecular biology of the agent, that there looks to be gain of function in it, and there are multiple components of that gain of function, and how come this narrative seems to be subsumed by those that are out looking for and this is before you even get into vaccines or anything, or what they would like to try to do with the current situation. Okay, and what we should be doing is making sure that people can understand the biology that's been that's come to the forefront here. And what I would do is I would encourage everyone. You need ignorance of science, like the law. It's not an excuse anymore. And there are particular elements that you need to understand right now that you're dealing with. And that's what gain of function means, where it's been targeted in the current SARS iteration, and then adjust your strategic posture appropriately, and then get to the point of, well, qui bono, as you said at the beginning. Okay, and the everyone's got dirty fingerprints all over this. It happened to go off in China. I don't think we'll ever know. Well, I think the evidence is leaning that the Chinese military, they're capable of doing some pretty vicious stuff too. It's not just the imperialist West, and by the looks of it, and the way these insertions have been done, and the way that the genome has been manipulated, the fingerprints are there. They're there if you take the time to look through the literature and to follow the provenance of the literature. And the fact that that's not being talked about at this point, to me, it's disturbing, because it looks like there's a deliberate suppression of information, and that ties into why everyone's being shut into their homes right now. And if were it a natural pathogen that just spontaneously emerges, they do. We should have gone back to normal society months ago, but that's not the case. And the fact that we're still in a lockdown situation, to me, it points to not some grand conspiracy per se. It's a sort of admission by the authorities that they realize that they're under the circumstances of a bio-warfare situation. And what you do in those circumstances is shelter in place. Now, how it sort of pans out from that, I don't know. I grew up in duck and cover, where it was supposed to be over in 24 hours to a week, and whoever managed to crawl out the rock and rubble, I don't know if you were blessed or cursed. But the problem is you're looking at a different type of weaponry being used. And the one thing that, if you go for military training, is that crowd control is critical, and they want you off the streets because who knows what pops off next. Especially if we can put a fingerprint on this agent, which looks like it was, it's done so professionally in terms of the manipulation that you you have to ask, even if it was released accidentally. Well, I would say that I don't think there could be an accident in this particular case. That the combination of scientific methods that are all in the literature, you just have to go and look for them, have been used by these individuals and institutes to bring us to this point. And there are particular people that you need to be holding to account under these circumstances. And telling people that viruses aren't real, 5G is going to cause this thing to spontaneously emerge in your skin because of, and to me, that was one of the more egregious scientific, distortions that happened, where there was this terrible paper which somehow crept onto the public databases from Italy, where they basically argued that DNA acts like a sort of transducer for EMF, 5G EMF waves. This stuff is nonsense. Okay, and I'll just finish with this because it's something that comes up a lot. That people want to say, "Oh, 5G microwaves are bad." Well, in a way, but so is light and ultraviolet, and this is all about watts per centimeter squared. And if I put my head in the microwave and switched it on, that's going to be bad for me. Okay, the microwave running to heat up the rice, okay, like millions and millions and millions of people do across the world, okay, and you're sitting on the other side of the room, or you've gone off to do something else, is not an issue. And yes, there's an issue with smart grids. There's an issue with where technology goes. But you know what? That's a timeless story with humanity. And are you a Luddite, or do you just roll with the technology? And we all seem to be sitting here seamlessly working with technologies that 100 years ago would have seemed disruptive. Okay, and now we're probably reaching a point where we know there's disruptive technologies coming, blockchain technologies, AIs, automation, and people are going to be going through a lot of changes right now. And that's why it's critical to have your head screwed on right and understanding all the factors involved. And first off, start with the basics. Understand the molecular biology of what it is that you're dealing with, the pathogenesis of how that would manifest. And a particular issue of mine is that this agent has components in it that target the nervous system, and no one talks about that.
And I wonder, and why do you think no one talks about it? What would be your take on that?
Because I would say it's control of information in a warfare scenario. That as bad as people panicking about there being a particularly vicious flu strain this season, and them going like a swarm of locusts through the supermarket to stock up on toilet paper, for example, if you tell people that, well, the pathogen is not only potentially very dangerous, particularly if you're of the comorbid type, but we've ratcheted up the tensions to war at a level that, well, exceeds way beyond anything that you would see in the Middle East, because it would be a global conflict at this stage, because you're dealing with China, and China has all our industry. You have to ask why do they have all our industry, and why were we unable to get PPE? Because the Chinese kept it all, and they knew, they had a good idea that this virus was released in October. So did elements of the United States that had been funding this type of research. And EcoHealth and those individuals, we know that they were in China in October when the release potentially occurred. And like I say, these people are getting more money from NIH. I would. That's where people need to be getting angry. Okay, if you're railing at the telecoms people for putting up, transmitters, etc., then you're missing the target right now. And they want you running down these rabbit holes because it keeps you occupied whilst you're having military maneuvers take place. And just I'll give a small example that in October, the United States Marine Corps were authorized for action on US soil for the first time in their history. No one speaks about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, mm-hmm. and the more I see people teeing off and getting into the weeds with respect to trying to go at the I don't want to say established, but where science has brought us to, and think that because they've read Kerry Mullis quote, that they've keyed into a fundamental issue of our time. No, you've just been played, I'm afraid, and I would encourage you to, again, you need to stop, take a break for a day, and then get back to looking at, and the key, start understanding the molecular biology. And that's not even my domain. My domain is in the neurosciences, and I can tell you that there's papers are coming out now that are supporting everything that I've said from the beginning, is that there's a capacity of this agent to target the nervous system. Once in the nervous system, there's a whole slew of consequences that emerge. Okay, and this is one thing that I didn't even predict. That what they've shown recently, very elegantly, that once the virus is in the central nervous system, it also attacks the peripheral nervous system through the manipulations that have taken place, because that furan cleavage, which everyone talks about, has a element that is synonymous with rabies or cobra toxin embedded in it, which means it targets cholinergic neurons. But going back to my previous point, which is that the virus is capable of going into the nervous system. It's a neurotropic agent, and there it doesn't kill the neurons. It can replicate and evade the immune system, and then is able to suffocate the cells, the surrounding neurons. And I can tell you from my research, 20 years, okay, that the networks that it would get into, because it would transfect via the nose, it's straight into a region called the limbic system. And you want, like I say, it would be very, very difficult to prove, but right now, just because we don't have the technology, but limbic disturbance is the is the pathogenesis of neuropsychiatric disorders, a whole slew of them. And as an addition to that, and I'll just finish on this, viruses that get into the brain, we are working, the science has sort of reached this point. They have a very big role to play in the emergence of things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all sorts of neurodegenerative disorders. And the fact that that's not being discussed at all, and I'm hearing all sorts of other narratives, just tells me again that everyone is being played. And that just plays into what Mark was saying, that where there would have been sort of progress made to people with these chronic neuroimmune type disorders, where they were people were saying, okay, it seems to be a thing now. It's getting accepted in the medical literature. Even 20 years ago, chronic fatigue syndrome wasn't really recognized as a syndrome. But now we understand it better. Chronic fatigue syndromes exist. It seems to be a consequence of interactions with agents and the immune and nervous system. And it's a situation that's getting worse and worse. And yeah, maybe vaccines play a role in that, but also so do pathogens in general. And yeah, otherwise I'll keep going.
Well, you brought up a good point, and within your answer there, you said there are certain people that need to be brought into account, and all of us seem to be skirting around the fact that things that aren't spoken about or directions that our society is pushed in, it has to come from a central point. And I think you make you make a very good point there. Mark, as we go along, what would you like to add to our conversation today that maybe hasn't been touched on? And we may have lost Mark. You know, as most of you watching today will see some of the Zoom audio or some of the
I'm here.
video. Oh, there you are. Some of the video has been pretty spotty today, but hopefully our conversation is made up for it. Yeah, Mark. Did you hear basically? Okay. What
Kevin
would you like to add?
Good progress on it. I agree with the direction, that what his the premise of his argument, where it takes a certain amount of trauma to get people to consider the possibility that MSNBC and Fox News, not to call out specific names, may not be telling the whole story. It does take a lot.
Are you sure? Are you? Oh my God, this is revelation.
So once someone gets to that point, it's as if it's a computer that's just been rebooted, and new code can be put on. That computer is fertile ground to seeing the world in a new way.
Great point.
And where Kevin, myself, and others, we're building this trust circle right now. Analysts who just we want to learn ourselves, and we want to promote the most accurate version possible, and we want other people to be questioning us. Is that another rush of information came in of potential distraction and misinformation? So instead of saying, well, there's Americans are overall unhealthy. We have bad diet, manufactured food, all kinds of chemicals from cleaning agents, which right now, by the way, we have even more of them than ever because of COVID. Even if COVID didn't exist, we're going to have people getting sick from having Tide thrown all over our rooms right now. And a huge combination of factors, but vaccines potentially, and there's chronic illnesses. But as opposed to reconsidering some things, like in my case, I think many people, a few 100,000 people may be dealing, even if they don't know it, undiagnosed chronic Lyme. Another set of code was loaded on to say, well, all the problems that people have maybe because of this or that. And once someone is now there running that code, for lack of a better way of describing it, it's really hard to then get them to, again, consider that they were just had on another reality installed onto them that they're now going to have to, work through. So this world of brave, selfless citizen researchers, citizen journalists, we have a bit of an enemy within right now. The opioid crisis, the many thousands of people who have died from that. It's not just the number of losses, the quantity of life lost in there. It's broken families, families which are also dealing with problems with debt and so on. And instead of looking at all of the challenges with the American family and addiction to drugs, gambling, etc., we now have a hashtag Save the Children, where I guess 50,000 American kids every year are being eaten by Tom Hanks. So we have real problems. We can have real pragmatic, helpful discussions and solutions. And as the opportunities have presented themselves for people to reconsider the world as been presented to them and to do productive, beneficial things, we lose that with this with these other conspiracy theories within the world of conspiracy theory. If you don't, I don't know how else to explain it. That's I think what has brought Kevin and myself together is that unified challenge. Not the fact that we see eye to eye and everything, but we see that there's this opportunity for people to reconsider the world is getting lost with more information within this community. And I don't know the best way to solve that other than to just keep doing the best job possible and keep questioning ourselves and trying to be positive and productive and so on and so forth.
You know, you hit one particular phrase that really jumped out at me. We don't always see eye to eye. You're speaking of yourself and Kevin. And I think within this investigative community that we all seem to be inhabiting, we're all playing detective in our own way. That I've been saying for years that no two truthers or activists or use whatever name you want to, none of us are going to agree on all the finer points of many of the rabbit holes that we have, working knowledge of. And I've found that there is a tendency for people to throw out the baby with the bathwater, that if they get a particular point that they don't agree with somebody on, or that they feel that this person is obfuscating or whatever, they tend to dismiss the entire body of work that this person has brought forth just because of this one or two main points. And we're all humans. We're all going to have, lapses in judgment. We're all going to have our ego get in the way, and we're all going to, make mistakes. And, what I look at with every person that I listen to is, what's the balance of this person? And what they're bringing to the table. Is there controlled opposition? You're damn right there's controlled opposition. It's everywhere. Oh, yeah. We're surrounded by psyops. But even the psyops or the controlled opposition people, they bring a certain amount of value to the table because that's what they're there to do. Then there's the limited hangout, which if some people go, I'm only going to follow, let's say, Alex Jones, right? Okay, fine. You follow Alex and he takes you to a certain level and he burns out your adrenal glands by making everything like so important. You got to pay attention. Yeah. But you only go so far with Alex. And what I've said to people is I would rather have them listening to Alex Jones or, Pickett or what's the guy, the health ranger, Mike Adams. I would rather have them starting there and then make discernments in about 6 months and say, okay, now I think I'm going to move on to some more independent and maybe more obscure, but actually better sources of information. So, I would love to say that not seeing eye to eye on every point is not a threat, and it's no reason to stop, and it's no reason to damage people beyond belief. It's just a point that you can see, the guy's probably lying his face off on this point, but over here he makes a lot of sense. Easier said than done, but I think in this world of zero tolerance that we've all been hammered with, it starts to get more difficult. And I'm an older guy, you can tell by the white beard. But it seems like there are people that are younger than I am that are not allowed, that don't have the skills or want to get the skills to actually talk and have a discussion and have a disagreement, or actually switch their position and say, you just made a point that I never really thought about. Damn, I never thought of that. I see it differently now. That's really hard to find today. However, I digress. To bring up one of the phrases of one of our favorite, YouTubers that just got completely disbarred. Doug, what's your final thoughts on where we went today, and what would you like to add that we didn't cover?
Well, I mean, I think I want to go with what Dr. McCairn was talking about in terms of what are we not allowed to talk about, because I think that's always what points to probably what we should be talking about. And then I wanted to bring up something. This is how I think about it. I actually have a kind of a funny way of doing a meta-analysis of conspiracy theory, and I call it the squatchometer. Where at the bottom of the rung, you really stick to the facts, and then at the top of the squatchometer, then you just fully believe in Sasquatch, right? You've gone full squatch. That's what I call it, because everybody has their different kind of tolerance levels for speculation. I mean, this is where I kind of wanted to go with this. I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about today, especially with the mainstream media, the corporate narratives, the government narratives, is that there seems to be some kind of social engineering going on. I mean, people are trying to push us into having this conversation about this narrative, but you're not allowed to have these other conversations, even though clearly intelligent people like Dr. McCairn can say, hey, this virus looks like it was genetically manipulated. This looks like it was created in a lab, but we're not allowed to talk about that. And that's just crazy talk. And, it's significant to know what you're allowed to talk about, what you're not allowed to talk about. But overall, you can see that there's some force that's, pushing us to talk about one thing and then pushing us to not talk about the other thing. And so then where do you go? I mean, we don't know who or what is driving that bus, this social engineering bus. And a lot of this information, we know that governments classify a lot of what they're doing. So then, we know governments spend tens of billions, probably hundreds of billions of dollars, certainly across the world, on classified projects that nobody knows what's going on. So a lot of what we're dealing with, let's take the HARP project, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much speculation. And you've got a lot of different people out there who are doing work that will only report on what they can prove. And then you've got a lot of people out there who are willing to speculate. You go deeper and deeper, especially into some of these classified projects like the HARP program. And it's like, well, what are they doing? And well, the government's not telling you what they're doing. So you have to speculate to a certain degree. And some people out there are willing to speculate more than others, and they go in different directions. There's just not a lot of facts that we can find so we can't necessarily prove, that this is exactly what they're doing, but we have to do some kind of speculation. And some people get more far out than others. And I guess what it boils down to me, and for me personally, I'm the kind of guy, I actually spent a couple of years of my life, probably more than I'd like to admit, going back and forth from, the CNN article or the Fox News article to the Alex Jones article, and going, which one has the actual better source material, or the James Corbett report, bouncing back and forth and trying to figure out, which news source do I trust? And that's what it boils down to. It's like, you've got to recognize that some people are engaging in speculation, which is fine, but it can get pretty far out, right? It can get kind of full squatch, and you just don't know if that's true or not. It's speculation, and it's cool. We have to engage in that kind of thing. We wonder, what the hell are they doing with all that money and all those classified operations? But then there's also really solid work, and people just need to learn how to use their critical thinking faculties and discern the difference between, a good journalist and someone that's just writing crap. Don't be afraid to click on the sources. Go back and find it and see if the primary sources. I've read some stuff from the mainstream media where if I read the source material, I would come up in my mind with a completely different narrative than what the guy actually wrote for, the Atlantic article or the NPR article or whatever. It's just so hilarious. Why did you even link to that? So you've got to actually link to the source material, read that, and decide if the narratives that the journalist is presenting, jives with what you're seeing in terms of the sources. And if you do that little bit of extra work, you can get to where you trust a source because they do consistently do good work. Maybe you don't have to, test them to that extent every time. But that's what I recommend to people that are getting out there in internet land and doing this kind of research. And eventually you can tell the difference between people who are at least, giving it their best to try to do the best work that they can. The people that are going to engage more into kind of wild speculation and not necessarily stick to the facts, and the people that are just spewing propaganda, where the narratives don't really match up with the facts, or there's a lot of, as we've discussed earlier, lying by omission, which is certainly another way that they get away with producing these false narratives based on the thing at hand, on the issues at hand. And again, just going back to what Dr. McCairn was saying, you can usually tell where you want to look by looking where they don't want you to look. When there's something you're not allowed to talk about, I'd check that out and try to find out what's actually going on, because there's probably something there. So
no wiki page means just something you want to know. It happens over and over and over again. It's the absence of documented information. That's usually a big clue for myself. Mm-hmm. And I think other people are starting to see that as well.
Yep. And Doug makes a good point about misdirection. It's a magician's trick which has worked for eons. Look here, look here, look here. Don't look over there. And the problem that we're challenged with is most of the people in our world have been seduced into not believing their common sense and not seeing that they're possibly being manipulated right now by the people that are basically being presented as, we're giving you the information that actually will help you understand your world, where in reality they're not doing that. All right. All right. Well, I think we've had a good conversation today. One of the things that I would like to add is I'm an activist. I'm not an expert. I can give you the Cliff's Notes on many of the rabbit holes that are out there, but the expertise with documentation and bibliographies, that's not my forte. But I'm so glad that Mark and Kevin, Dr. McCairn, both of you have been on the call today, to give us your expertise. And Doug, your editorializing was right on the nose. And the one thing I'll add personally from my conversations that I've had with many people trying to do what Ed Griffin talks about, red pilling them, is the one thing I've tried to do is saying, in my opinion, from my point of view, as I see it, this is what I think. I've tried to add that because it gives them a chance to see that I'm presenting a point of view or a piece of information that I've worked on and I've made discernments over, but that doesn't make it true. And the other thing that I try to do is when I present these things, I try to do it in such a way that makes people curious to know more. And if I can make them curious, then I've done my job, because you can't load up somebody's brain in half an hour with 1/10 of what we've discussed here today without short-circuiting their neurons. And I'm sure Dr. McCairn would probably agree with that. So, in closing, anything else, that we missed? I'm getting...
I was just going to say, I think what's necessary is for there to be dialogue, and again, hammer home the point right now. What is it that you aren't allowed to discuss? And
yes.
I'm just going to point my own sphere, which is the science domain around SARS-CoV-2, and there's been a concerted push to buttress the idea of zoonosis right from the beginning, because that literally puts everyone into CYA mode, and that narrative is crumbling by the day, and people need to get on top of that, because the strength of science is that people have left their fingerprints all over this, and that can go right down from the top of NIH to NIAID to any other lab or what have you, and there has to be an accounting of this, and we're fortunate right now in this current time where we're able to do it, and so please use those tools, and please, I would encourage people to don't fall into your confirmation biases, particularly at a time like this. You can make the problem much worse.
At the very beginning of what you just said, Dr. McCairn, you said, why aren't we allowed to talk about this? And you reminded me of the quote from Voltaire: to learn who rules over you, simply find out whom you cannot criticize. So on that particular note, I think we've done a good job today. As far as my activism goes, just on a personal note, I will be attending a meeting tomorrow up in Live Oak, California, which is 51 miles north of Sacramento. And it's called Free America. It's put on by Free America Now. By the time people see this, it will have been done. But I will be there looking at the meeting. It's called Uniting the Sheriffs with the People, where in America, the sheriff is the ultimate legal authority in the county of which he is the sheriff of. in his ability, his authority trumps, lack of a better term, supersedes the governor and the state police and the federal authorities. So what we're going to be doing is I'm just basically covering it, but sheriffs, constitutional activists, and doctors are going to be speaking on the totalitarian actions and the mandates that are related to this pandemic, if I may use that term, from my personal point of view. And that's my version of being an activist. And I'm going to encourage everybody to learn more about how you can support and back and be there for your sheriff if they have the guts to basically stand up to their respective governors. All right. So on that note, it's been a great transparent media truth roundtable today. And once again, all of us have to thank executive producer Rob Rubin, without whom none of us would be here talking today.
Thank you, Rob.
And in our show notes, yep, thank you. And we're going to have the graphics that show Kevin's YouTube channel, also Mark's YouTube channel, and of course Doug's YouTube channel, and possibly even mine. So thank you very much for being here, and we're looking forward to doing something very similar in the future. All right, guys, have a good day.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, John. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Well, all right, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed that 17th Roundtable discussion brought to you by Transparent Media Truth. Really something that needed to be talked about. I mean, it was very interesting. We got the idea to do the show. Rob Rubin was introduced to Kevin McCairn, PhD, who was kind of ruffling feathers over the internet because he wasn't afraid to get out there and say, hey, you people better be doing your research. Here's my opinion. Here's the research to back it up. So we decided to do this roundtable discussion that really kind of brought together this group of people in this roundtable to discuss how to do good internet research and really discern the difference between fact and fiction when it comes to what's going on out there in the world. I mean, all of us really are just armchair warriors here on the computer doing research. Very rarely are we actually experiencing the news before it comes out. And so the best we can do is find the best source material that we can and come up with the best narrative for ourselves to try to understand what's happening in the world around us. And it's important that you do this with the clarity and an ability to critically think. So 1 + 1 actually equals 2 at the end of the day, and you don't just get caught up in a lot of crazy ideas that are getting floated out there. On top of this, of course, we have people that are just calling other people's ideas misinformation and disinformation, and there's a lot of censorship that's going on out there. Whether or not it's because the information is actually true or false should be up to you. It would be a fundamental tenet of a free society to allow freedom of speech so that we can apply our own critical thinking skills to the information that's out there. We don't need an authority to tell us what is and is not the truth. And that's the important thing about having an episode like this, so that people can really learn how to apply themselves, how to look at the sources. I know a lot of times reading these peer-reviewed studies can be kind of boring for a lot of people, but educating ourselves a little bit about science so we can understand these peer-reviewed studies, these scientific studies, and we can make decisions for ourselves as to whether the source material is really worth our time or not. I have been spending a lot of time with corporate media, clicking on source material that doesn't even have anything to do with the narrative of what's going on in the article. And it happens in independent media too. You really have to check people's sources before you decide that you trust that they do good work as a journalist. So I hope we all do this and do the extra due diligence to make sure that we are using our critical thinking skills to the best of our abilities to try to discern what's going on out there. Don't take our word for it. Do the research for yourself. With so many people trying to tell you what the truth is out there, I mean, one of the things that really got to me in that conversation was hearing Housatonic talk about the signs that say we believe in science. I see these signs around California as well. They're all over the country, and I just don't know anyone who doesn't believe in science. And it's interesting to me that it seems like one side of the equation believes, say, that science says one thing, one kind of homogenistic claim that is all true, without recognizing that scientists have disagreements all the time, that science isn't exactly sure what's going on. So those of us who believe in the scientific process, which is why it was so great to have Dr. McCairn there, he literally is a brain scientist. So he understands what science is, and he knows how to do this research, and he also understands that there are disagreements among scientists just like everyone else, and everyone needs to do the research and learn for themselves what they believe. So I hope that you were able to check this out and gain some insight into how to learn how to do this kind of research with a critical background, to be able to have an eye for spotting the source material that just doesn't add up to the narratives that you're hearing. Please take the time to read an article and check those sources. See if when you read the sources, you get the same narrative inside your mind, you get the same story inside your mind that you're reading in the article. Make sure that the links actually link to source material that has anything to do with what the article is talking about. I mean, I've seen so many things. Make sure that the links are going to primary source material and not just another article written by the same company or even the same person. Or if it does link to another article by the same person, then you got to look through that article and make sure that there's a link in there that actually shows a primary document. We have to really be on top of our game, especially those of us who have political opinions that are outside of the mainstream, because we get hammered from the left and from the right. They don't want to believe that the whole system can be as corrupt as we think that it is. And so we have to have all of our ducks in a row, and we have to have our facts straight if people are even going to be open-minded enough to pay attention to what we're saying in the first place. So please pay attention to what you learned here today. I want to give a lot of thanks to Dr. Kevin McCairn. Check out his YouTube channel at Dr. Kevin McCairn, PhD. Also, Mark Kulacz for coming on the show, and you can check him out at Housatonic. That is the name of his YouTube channel. John Knox, of course, guest host for this roundtable, and he runs the LA Skywatch website, so you can check out what's going on there in terms of his anti-geoengineering work. My name is Doug McKenty, and of course you can see my show, The Shift with Doug McKenty, on YouTube or Facebook. I'm also at www.theshiftwithdougmckenty.com, theshiftnow.com, and you can check out all of Transparent Media Truth's work at the Transparent Media Truth website on YouTube, as well as transparentmediatruth.com. And I want to give a big thanks to Rob Rubin, as always, for producing this. So hope y'all think about going on to the Patreon page and maybe throwing in some support for the work that we're doing here at Transparent Media Truth. So thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the flip side. All right, take care, everybody. The opinions and ideas expressed in this roundtable discussion do not necessarily reflect the views of Transparent Media Truth, but only those of the speakers participating in the discussion. Under the copyright disclaimer within Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowances are made for fair use of public content for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.